This episode of the Cult Popture podcast was brought to you by our Patreon. If you want to tell us which films we should watch or get 2 extra exclusive podcasts a month, then please consider joining the cult and donating at www.patreon.com/cultpopture. We come from a land down under. Down under.
Women grow.
Where women grow. Huge.
Is that the lyric?
They keep getting bigger and bigger until they
Attack of the 50-Foot Woman was set in Australia.
They eclipse the very sun itself. That was fun.
Is it actually is it where women grow?
Yeah, where women grow and men
it's
plunder.
glow. It's where women glow.
Nah, I'm pretty sure it's grow, dude. Welcome along. Welcome down under even to our listeners today. My name is AJ and I'm joined by Richard. And you're
Hello.
listening to Film Franchise Fortnights on the Cult Popture podcast. If you've never heard us before, this is a podcast where Richard and I, we sometimes voted on, select a film franchise, and then we spend the next 2 weeks watching that franchise, and then we get together at the end of that fortnight to discuss it. And this is that discussion.
Just as the prophecy foretold. Here we are.
Yeah.
Ready to talk.
Yeah.
And what franchise are we talking about this week, Alexander?
Well, thank you for asking, Richard. The franchise that we are discussing this week is the Crocodile Dundee Trilogy, the Aussie classic.
But Dundee, I thought he must be Scottish.
Is he?
Well, Dundee's in Scotland.
Ah, really?
My mum's from Dundee.
Oh, cool. That's a
Shout
fun
out
little
to my
fact. Hid that from me. I would have put it in my notes.
Put it on the IMDb page.
Yeah, that's one of the IMDb pieces of trivia for the first film is Dundee's actually where Richard's mum's from. No, I kid. I joke. The Crocodile...
I kid. She's not from Dundee.
My mother's dead. The Crocodile...
She was just mowing the lawns, AJ.
She was mowing the lawn. She's stopped now. We had to...
I can see someone outside in the reflection of your glasses.
Yeah, she's out there doing the gardening. Shout out to my mum. I am 25. The Crocodile Dundee trilogy depicts the life and times of an experienced Australian bushman named Mick Crocodile Dundee. And I did air quotes when I said crocodile.
Yeah, well, it's like Michael Mick Crocodile Dundee.
Yeah, it is, eh? So yeah, it's about Mick Dundee and his various travels across Australia, New York, and as we'll eventually see, Los Angeles. The basic concept of the series is a classic fish-out-of-water tale as we see the out-of-touch but borderline invincible Dundee encounter people completely different to him, experience comical culture shock, and wind up in hilarious misunderstandings in America. The series stars Paul Hogan in the title role with various other regulars who show up across the films. Most notably would be Linda Kozlowski, who plays Dundee's love interest Sue.
Yep.
Now you know as much as we do. You're up to speed. So the first film, Crocodile Dundee, came out in 1986. It was directed by a guy named Peter Feynman, who is more known for his work in Australian television than as a movie director. But he would later go on to be one of the producers for Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest. Did you ever see that movie?
I did not.
Are you aware of it?
Barely.
Yeah, it's like a flew under the radar. Well, I don't think it flew under the radar, but certainly for our generation, it didn't have the lasting power of other animated classics.
Yeah, is Fern Gully one of the ones that people are like Avatar is just a rip-off of?
Yeah.
I feel like that's where I've heard it.
It's got Robin Williams in it, doing a voice role because it's animated. What do you think Crocodile Dundee 1986 has on Rotten Tomatoes? What was the general consensus?
I feel like it would actually be pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be 80s.
Yep, it is 87%.
Nice. Yeah, because it's the whole coming before like, you know, when a film comes out before Rotten Tomatoes is a thing, people only go back to review films they really like.
Yeah, and it has benefit and deficit, right? Because okay films are rated a lot lower than they probably deserve compared to we'll talk about this later probably. But what's the plot of Crocodile Dundee, the first film?
All right, well, it follows Sue Shelton, who's a journalist who travels to the Australian outback in the Northern Territory, to be specific. For our American listeners, Australia has states just like you,
but they've got real boring names. Well,
yes,
they're not.
Northern Territory,
all on
Queensland,
brand.
Tasmania,
Western Australia is one of the states.
And is that it?
Yeah, sure. I don't think Tasmania is a state, but yeah.
No, I'm pretty sure. Aussie I think they're called territories, aren't they?
No,
I feel like I've missed one. No, New South Wales.
Ah, yeah. There you go. New South Wales.
Yeah. Oh, and Victoria as well.
Yeah. There we go. There's 100. There's 100 states. There's more states in Australia than America. What's the film about, though?
So she travels to the Northern Territory to meet Michael Mick Crocodile J. Dundee, who has, rumoured to have lost half his leg to a battle with a crocodile. Eventually, they do meet. She's not overly impressed with him, doesn't quite live up to the legend, but she is impressed by his, he's got a very kind, sort of almost naive manner, especially with women, and he's also got this oneness with the outback. So they do eventually become attracted to each other. He's kind of a bit sexist in a way, but then he overcomes it, has a willingness to change, and Sue invites Mick to come back to New York with her. And then the second half of the film is kind of like a traditional fish out of water story. Lots of Mick not knowing, what things are. Oh, what's a bidet? What's this? And his confidence as well. Because he's so sure of himself and interacting with other people, it throws them off.
The scenes in the second half of the film are very interchangeable with each other. They're basically different sketches of what an Australian bushman would think of New York.
Yeah, and Sue also gets engaged to a guy called Richard, who's a bit of a dick. And she's hesitant. She kind of just says yes because she's surprised. Mick, dejected, goes to go walkabout around the US, which is like walkabouts, the thing you do in Australia. If you've ever seen Lost, it's what Locke wanted to do, even though he couldn't walk.
Spoilers.
But then Sue runs to the subway to catch him just before he gets on the train, and she gets his attention, and the film ends immediately.
Yeah, it ends. It's like. Yeah, it's a romantic comedy, I guess, would be the genre of the first film.
I guess it's, if you count as a genre, like fish out of water is the main appeal of it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Cool. So 2 years later, Crocodile Dundee, which, by the way, was a smash hit, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. But Crocodile Dundee came out in 1988, 2 years later, directed by a guy named John Cornell. Cornell has only ever directed one film since Crocodile Dundee 2, so he's and two films all up, that was 1990's Almost an Angel, which also stars Paul Hogan and Linda Kozlowski. Almost an Angel's tagline is, "This time the man from down under is working for the man upstairs." And I was like, I don't need to know anything more about this movie.
Maybe if you're listening to this and you're one of our patrons, suggest good generic movie podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So Almost an Angel has 29% on Rotten Tomatoes, but what do you think Crocodile Dundee 2 has on Rotten Tomatoes?
I'm going to say sub 50.
Much.
High 20s, low 30s.
Oh, it's got 11%.
Really?
It's too low, right? It's better. It's better than that. It's better than 11%.
Yeah.
But I guess it's that thing you said, the movies that came out before Rotten Tomatoes, people go back to them and they're real angry that Crocodile Dundee 2 ruined their legacy, so they rate it lower than it probably deserves, maybe.
Yeah, if it came out, if these movies came out now, like movies of this quality came out now, they'd do fine.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so what is Crocodile Dundee 2 about?
So 1 year later, Sue and Mick are living together in New York City. He's got a bit of notoriety, bit of an icon due to Sue's writing about him. He gets a job working for a guy called Leroy Brown, who's a stationery salesman who has this like real tough guy image, so he works to maintain it kind of thing. But anyway, Sue's ex-husband, who we haven't seen yet until now, gets caught up in some shady business with a Colombian drug cartel. And he gets Sue involved as well before his untimely death due to getting murdered. Mm-hmm. So Leroy ends up helping as well. He manages to contact some gangs, get them to help out. But anyway, the last act of the film has Sue and Mick go back to Australia so they can like fight the Colombians.
Well, it's like a witness protection thing, but the Colombians follow them there.
But and then the Colombians chase them there, and they end up having this big fight. So yeah, the third act of this film takes place in the Australian outback, so he's got the upper hand. Yeah. Sue and Mick win, and he's like, "You ready to go home?" And she goes, "I am home." And the film ends immediately.
Ah, beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. So, I don't know. If the first film was a romantic comedy, the second film's like a crime film.
Yeah.
It's a real weird shift in genre there.
Yeah.
But don't worry, it's all rectified in the third film, which is kind of both a romantic comedy and a crime film. And that was 13 years later. One of the earliest examples I'm aware of like a distant sequel, like you have with The Force Awakens or Indiana Jones, The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. This was one of the first examples I'm aware of Crocodile Dundee, of a distant sequel. I'm sure there are. I'm pretty sure, like, the Terminators came out pretty far away from each other.
Yeah, well, the longest gap between two theatrically released films, like sequels, is, I believe, Fantasia, which Fantasia 2000 came out a year before Crocodile Dundee.
There you go.
And that's like 53 years.
There you go. So this was only 13, so nothing in comparison. So this film was called Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles. So 2001, directed by Simon Wincer. And Simon Wincer is the Dundee trilogy's most prolific director yet, with currently 19 films under his belt. Crocodile Dundee in LA was his 16th film. And from what I could see, and I might just be naive and not have heard of a bunch of his other movies, but his most notable other venture was the first Free Willy film. So that's a pretty big film.
Yeah. It's not a small film. It's
Yeah.
It's
but he is an Australian director. They're all Australian directors as well.
Oh, that's so good. You got to bloody support the locals, mate.
Exactly. And what do you think this got on Rotten Tomatoes?
Oh, this will be... See, I would have said this would be like 11.
Because I know
this is... It is.
It's the same as Crocodile Dundee 2.
Yeah, because I knew this one is famously derided.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. This is a famous shitty sequel example.
Yeah. So what is this shitty sequel about?
So Sue and Mick are living together in the Aussie outback with their young son Mikey. And Mick is no longer allowed to hunt crocs because it's been outlawed. It's been made illegal to actually kill crocodiles, and so he just like wrestles them for entertainment. But he's obviously feeling unfulfilled. And Sue gets a good job opportunity in Los Angeles, California, so they move there. Then we get about half an hour or so of some classic fish out of water stuff. This time he's in like the City of Lights. He's in Hollywood, the City of Angels, I guess. And we have a bunch of comedy brought from the fact that Mick sees himself as like an expert on the US and civilized world, even though he's clearly not to us, the audience, but he's the one teaching his son. So, there's a bit of a disconnect there, and we earn some often hilarious results.
Yeah.
So the job that Sue got, her predecessor died, was killed while investigating a film studio who were making a sequel to their terrible lethal agent films, and so it's like, why are they still making sequels if it was such a bomb? And it's like, well, you obviously don't know a lot about Hollywood. Like, if that's suspicious, that
yeah,
you're
that's
like
investigating. I mean, the very existence of Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles, and it's not like a cute little like tongue-in-cheek metaphor for the film itself either. It's not like they're like, and the Lethal Agent 3 is coming out 13 years after Lethal Agent 2. Nah, it's none of that. They seem blissfully unaware of their own irony.
Yeah. But Mick starts working at the studio, at first as an extra, then as like an animal trainer. He becomes suspicious when there's some paintings show up on set that are supposed to be copies of like lost artwork, but then it's revealed that they're actually the real lost artwork, some priceless pieces of art. And so Mick and Sue solve the case and return to Australia to get married. And meanwhile, while this was all happening, Mikey gets enrolled in a Los Angeles school, and Mick's brother Jacko comes to help babysit him, and Jacko ends up hitching up with Mikey's teacher.
Yeah.
And they all live happily ever after.
Yeah. Also, I guess worth noting, do you want to tell people who the villain is played by in the film?
Well, Mike Tyson's in this film.
We'll get to that.
Mike Tyson has a small cameo in the film, but the villain in the film is, if you've ever seen Breaking Bad, there's like whenever Jesse, there's like 3 or 4 episodes, Jesse goes to like group therapy. The leader of that group of the therapy is the leader of the villains, and one of his henchmen is Mike from Breaking Bad.
Yeah, Jonathan Banks, who's an interesting actor to watch do other roles, because he plays Mike so well in Breaking Bad that you kind of just think that's what he's like. And then in Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles, he's like got this like, you know, Eastern European accent, and like he's shown like whimpering and fear at one point, and I was like, this is weird to see Mike in this way.
Yeah, because he's also like, because he played Mike so well, and I think part of him in real life is very much like, like, you know, you wouldn't be running around with him, but like, now every notable role he's gotten since being cast as Mike, he got cast because they just wanted Mike Ehrmantraut. Ben's father in, third time mentioning Adam Scott, but Ben's father in Parks and Rec is, they were like, we want to cast someone like Mike Ehrmantraut, and they were like, well, let's just see if Jonathan Banks will do it. So he just played Ben's dad, and he's literally just Mike. And then same thing with like Community. Yeah, he's in season 5. Yeah, as the new teacher, and we're replacing Pierce, and it's literally just like he's there because they wanted someone to basically be Mike, but he does like cartoon ducks. Yeah.
So thank you for those synopses, Richard. As a whole,
I wrote them down.
Oh, very good. Without getting into any like too specific review, what did you think of the series? Like, what order did you like them in? What overall your thoughts?
So the first one, it's easy to see why it's a classic. Yeah, and I definitely enjoyed a lot of elements of it. Some parts of it haven't aged too well, as I'm sure we'll talk about more. But it's definitely got some really good moments, and I mean, it's enjoyable enough. The second one, I didn't really find as interesting, just by the design of it, I guess. And then the third one, it's a worse movie than the other two, but it kind of returned to a lot of the stuff that you like about the first one.
Yeah, totally, I agree. All right, so a bit of useless statistics and trivia, which is what I've now named this segment. First of all, what I just realised before, so I'll say this up top. This is our second trilogy, our second franchise, which has a character named Mick and a character named Mike. And it's because they're kind of similar characters. So Mick Dundee's son is called Mikey, and in Look Who's Talking, the baby was called Mickey, and then in the TV show Baby Talk, the baby was called Mikey, or the other way around. I can't remember anymore. Right. Anyway, this is our 11th trilogy, if you count Pup Stars as its own trilogy, and if you count the Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, which we included the 2 Amazing Spider-Man films in that podcast, but of course there is a definitive Spider-Man trilogy. This is also our second franchise after the Hangover trilogy, which features Mike Tyson. He shows up in LA, as we said. This is our second franchise after Back to the Future in which a character is mistaken for Clint Eastwood. Because in Crocodile Dundee 2, he like takes out a gangster, and these like Japanese tourists like take a photo of him, and then as he walks off, one of the tourists is like, "Do you know who that was? Clint Eastwood." And I spared you trying to do the accent, but the accent kind of makes it funnier. But I didn't want to put that on my head. So this is also our second franchise after Ace Ventura, which focuses on a character who has a special connection with / ability to control animals. And I kind of felt like Dundee was a Australian Ace Ventura mixed with a little bit of Captain Jack Sparrow, like, because he's got that legend about him, the whole like he was in the same way that Jack was stranded on an island. Dundee had to crawl home from the outback after being attacked by a crocodile.
Also, if the second Ace Ventura film had come out a year later, this would have been our second franchise to be a trilogy, which has a 2-year gap between films and then a 13-year gap between films.
Wow.
Because it's like a 1-year gap and then a 14-year gap.
I like how that's not a statistic, but you thought of it. Crocodile Dundee is our 6th franchise to feature a specific animal in its title, the others being Pupstar, Cats and Dogs, Spider-Man, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and SpongeBob SquarePants, and I had to look up if a sponge was considered an animal. It is.
Nice.
So there we go. So my first thing I wanted to talk about was Paul Hogan himself, so the star of the films.
Yeah.
And because
bloody Aussie legend.
Yeah. I didn't really know anything about Paul Hogan outside. Like, when I was a kid, I thought him and Hulk Hogan were the same person. Like, they kind of look alike. And, like one's like a beefcake.
The leathery
version.
skin.
Yeah. And as an adult, I only knew Paul Hogan as the guy from Crocodile Dundee, but he was like a producer for the movies, and he wrote them, and the marketing very much feels like, oh, look what old Paul Hogan's doing next, sort of like how Sacha Baron Cohen would do something. It's like, what's Sacha Baron Cohen doing next, kind of thing.
Yeah, I kind of saw him as like we had John Clark, the Aussies had Paul Hogan.
Yeah, sure. That's a good way to look at it. So Paul Hogan is a comedian, but his initial claim to fame would have been Australia's answer to the Benny Hill show, which was called the Paul Hogan Show, which aired on Australian TV from 1973 to 1984. Hogan appeared in it playing several different characters, which is interesting because, kind of like Jonathan Banks, I kind of find it hard to believe that Paul Hogan isn't like some version of Mick Dundee.
Yeah.
Like, it just, the character that Mick Dundee feels like the type of person who isn't self-aware enough to be an actor, which is a testament to Paul Hogan's acting. So good on him. Paul Hogan claimed to have invented the character himself while in New York, imagining how funny it would be to see a North Territory bushman in the big city. Presumably, he didn't think much past this nugget of an idea, as the first film was kind of void of any real story beyond, what if a bushman was in New York? But however, despite Hogan's insistence that Crocodile Dundee was his own creation, it was later revealed that the real-life inspiration for the character was a bushman named Rod Ansell, whose boat capsized during a solo hunting expedition in Australia, and he spent 2 months trapped in the wilderness. It says here he survived by drinking cow blood, sleeping with snakes, and occasionally fighting and decapitating the odd crocodile. So this guy was a total character. He had attend BBC interviews barefoot, things like that.
We should try to get him on the podcast.
Well, I've got bad news. That won't happen. Because
I've got bad news because he's turned down the podcast.
No, he was killed in a police shootout. And many think that he was actually driven mad due to his exclusion from the success of the Crocodile Dundee movies. Because they didn't acknowledge him or pay him or anything.
But it also seems like he shouldn't care. Like I said,
yeah.
I understand how someone would care, but it also seems like he's not the kind of person to care.
Yeah. So, back to Paul Hogan, he has sort of given like a description of how he interprets the character, and in a true demonstration of just how different the Kiwi accent is from the Aussie one, Richard, I want you to read this quote from, I'm sending it to you now, from Paul Hogan as Paul Hogan. Can you do that?
I can try.
All right.
But so I don't know if you got this written down anywhere, but Paul Hogan's had he's gained a bit of notoriety in the last bit over a decade for some other stuff, yeah?
Yeah, tax evasion and like a super messy divorce and stuff like that.
Yeah, that was when I was like, oh, he's still alive, because he was on the news all the time about he had all these tax issues.
Yeah, I wrote it down, then I was like, this isn't Woman's Weekly. We don't need to talk about his divorce and his tax evasion, but whatever. It is there if you want to go look for it. But I sent you that quote now. Can you please read us that?
There's a lot about Dundee that we think we're all like, but we're not. Because we live in Sydney. He's a mythical outback Australian who does exist in part. The frontiersman who walks through the bush picking up snakes and throwing them aside, living off the land, who can ride horses and chop down trees, and has had that simple, friendly, laid-back philosophy. It's like the image the Americans have of us, so why not give them one? We've always been desperately short of folk heroes in this country. Ned Kelly's pathetic. So are the Bushrangers.
Very good.
There's some bits in there where I kind of got it, but
yeah. I actually think that's a really cool way of looking at it, is that the American idea of what an Australian is, the like stereotype, isn't actually true. However, that does exist in some part. And what happens if he was like the only Australian these Americans ever met? Would just and actually the film did get in trouble with some Australian critics, because it was like, oh, this is just perpetuating a stereotype, but it's not really a bad stereotype. So, and if you think every Australian's like that, I mean, that's kind of on you, I think. But to Paul Hogan's credit, I actually do think that Mick Dundee himself is a really good character, and he's definitely like the saving grace of the sequels.
Although they do kind of bastardize his character a little bit, especially in the third one.
Sure, I think
because there's in the first one, it's like he's naive, but he means really well, and then there's a lot of times in the third one where it's just like, you're just being a fucking idiot. Yeah.
But I did feel a bit, and this won't make complete sense, but it felt like I was watching a movie about my granddad. My granddad's not Australian, but he's the type of guy who, when he was young, would, if there was a snake there, he'd just act. You know, he'd just grab it and crush it. That's right. He'd do that.
How often did that happen growing up?
No, I never saw it happen. I don't think he's ever been to Australia, but just his attitude and his like knowledge of the outside world reminded me of my granddad. That's not even the first time I've mentioned my granddad on the podcast. I actually tried to do an interview with him once, but it did not. As you can imagine, trying to interview someone like Mick Dundee, it did not turn out well. So I would say that the trilogy as a whole suffers from not really knowing what to do with such a great character. Like, the first film gets the closest, but it still fires all over the place. Like, it's barely about anything. Like, the contrivances to get him to New York are just that. Like, they're like, yeah, he ends up in New York, and then it's like, as I said before, it's just a series of sketches that are loosely strung together through like a romantic comedy, which is kind of off because like Sue and Richard are clearly boyfriend and girlfriend, and it's never said out loud that she's like cheating on Richard with Mick, but it's obvious, you know, like no one responds in the way you would if someone was cheating. And the second film, as I said, it's like a dark crime story, and it goes for so long. It's the longest of the three, and when and probably about the 3/4 mark, as you say, the last act of the film is set in Australia. I thought the film was about to finish, and then they're like, "Right, let's go to Australia," and I was like, "What? I'm so over this movie. I couldn't believe that it still had so long to go after that."
Yeah, and actually, I should say as well, because had you seen any of them before?
No.
Because I'd seen the first one years and years ago, and I had seen the last act of the second one before. So I think I've just assumed that, you know, the first one, they end up back in Australia, and because I knew it, like, it ended with this big battle in Australia. But then I was, I didn't realize that was actually the second one that I'd seen. So that was interesting.
Yeah. And so the third film to go along this theme, again, it doesn't really know what to do with them, and it shoehorns the crime stuff back into the story, which it didn't really need. I actually thought what would have been a cooler third film was they're making a movie of Mick Dundee, and he's like overseeing production. Yeah. That's the obvious. Why does he go to Hollywood?
Yeah, because we got, and I did think about that for my Continue the Franchise, because we get, it's Crocodile Dundee in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And so,
it's obvious.
It makes sense.
It feels like like they had it in their lap and then made the wrong movie, which would have made him doubly fish out of water, which is kind of cool because now he's a fish out of water in a city he doesn't know, and he's like having to be a consultant for a film, which
like
is
producer,
So the first film, weirdly to me, it feels like two films pushed into one. It feels like they kind of used what they could have done, spread out over a sequel in one film, because we start with Sue being the fish out of water in Australia for like the first half of the movie, and then they go to New York and Mick becomes the odd one out. But before watching these films, I had always assumed the first was set entirely in Australia and the second was set entirely in New York. Like, I thought, and that makes sense to me. It's like, especially if you make Sue the protagonist of the first film, right? If like, this is me script doctoring here, and it's all just the story about this woman who goes and meets this mythical figure and gets to know him and falls in love with him while traversing the great outback of Australia, that would make way more sense to me. And you could even put in, like, you know, you could up the stakes so that they uncover poachers or a drug trade or whatever, which would have made the bizarrely higher stakes in the second film not as out of place, maybe. I'm not saying this is a better film, I'm just saying I'm surprised this wasn't what happened, because then you go, okay, we've done American goes to Australia. What's the obvious choice for the sequel? The Australian goes to America. I don't know, I just assumed that was what the films were before I saw them.
If I may, I think that's pretty dumb. Like, I don't know, give me like another movie. Just name any good movie.
I can only think of Space Jam off the top of my head, but I feel like that's not going to fly. The Godfather.
Okay, well, I'll do Space Jam, actually. So imagine if Space Jam was like, okay, what about if in the first film it's just normal people playing basketball, and then in the second film it's like, we have the Looney Tunes versus the aliens. It's like you're holding the hook of the film and like the log line of the film to the second film.
I would say it's more the first Space Jam is a live action person in a cartoon world, and then the second Space Jam is the Looney Tunes in a live action world.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a good way to do it. But again, like, you're just needlessly splitting up a film. Like, because we've seen Romancing the Stone, we've seen the first half of Crocodile Dundee before, but the whole appeal of the film is getting this Australian guy into the hustle and bustle of the big city. So,
yep, sure.
Yeah, and then I think returning at the end of the second one, because it kind of just flips it. Yeah. So first one is like first half, and then they flip it. So, with all due respect, I think your idea,
well, goodbye,
was bad.
Hangs up. No, so this idea I do have, though, and I don't even know if I'm not that passionate about it. I'm just like,
oh, good, because I'm gonna shit all over it.
Yeah, it's just what I'd assumed the films were, and if it were this way, I think it would have made way for the third film to still remain Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles, and you could have even titled the second film Crocodile Dundee in New York.
Crocodile D.
You know, so you got Crocodile Dundee in New York, Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles. Right. And this is us talking about titles on this podcast, by the way,
shit.
Which we do a lot.
Buddy snuck up on me, mate.
So do you have anything to say about the titles? Do you have any thoughts? Or anything you would think I'd be annoyed by?
I don't like the idea of Crocodile Dundee in New York, Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles, because to me, like, now he's here is kind of a dumb sequeling, like, titling scheme.
Why do you think it's dumb?
And also, like, to your general public, especially outside of America, and because it's made for an Australian audience, I guess. New York and Los Angeles aren't going to feel too different.
Right.
Like, if you said New York and then Los Angeles, I'm like, well, it's just in the USA for both of them.
Okay.
And USA listeners have been like, they're completely different cultures.
Okay.
But no, they're not.
You're continuing the legacy of you not liking my title ideas, which is annoying because I really thought I'd got you with this one. I was
were you seriously pitching In New York as a good title?
Yeah.
Oh, fuck. Okay. All right. And you thought that was going to be the one to get me?
No, I don't know. It just makes sense to me. But
oh no,
right,
that's one of your worst ones so far.
Oh, cool. Thank you. I strive to try and beat my record of titles that I think are great that you don't like. I'm yet to get to the comedic heights of a dog with a pwn.
See, that was your best title.
It's not my fucking best. It's the worst one I've come up with. Anyway.
No, I mean, so on one end of the scale, you've got Dog with a Pwn. On the other end of the scale, you've got Crocodile Dundee in New York and Crocodile and Jurassic Park B.
Jurassic Park B is the best frickin' one I've done, man. It's such a good title. So, one fun thing about these titles, moving right on, that in America there are quotation marks around the word crocodile in the title, and this was to ensure people didn't think he was a crocodile. It's a very American way of thinking of that. I mean, I guess if you saw it written down, you might think he's actually a crocodile, but I don't know even if putting quotation marks in front of it make it any easier. Yeah. All right, so that's all we got to say about titles.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, because I know you're like do numerals up to 3 and then abandon them for the 4th kind of guy. One of those kind of guys.
Yeah.
And so how do you feel about them abandoning it after 2 rather than 3?
Would
you have preferred just Crocodile Dundee 3?
No, I like it being in Los Angeles. I think it tells you, it's when you've seen the first 2, especially when there's been such a long gap, it tells you, why should I go see the 3rd one? Because it's like, oh, he's in LA now. Oh, that's interesting. We've only ever seen him in New York.
They should have like Crocodile Dundee in Japan and Kyoto or something.
Yeah.
Because that would be good.
I feel like it would have been a real racist movie, to be honest.
Yeah.
They just
if they'd done it in like the
themselves.
80s as well, that would have been real.
Cool. So do you think the films are more made by Australians for Americans or made by Americans for Australians or both?
I would say made by Australians for Australians.
Well, actually, the first film was an attempt to make a commercial Australian film that would appeal to a mainstream American audience because it's more made by Australians for Americans, which is clear because I feel like the Australian characters are really accurate and the American characters are a bit more one size fits all what you'd expect Americans to be like. Yeah. Like, I feel like if it was made by Americans, the Australian characters would be a lot cheesier and a lot more the nuances there wouldn't be there.
But I can dig that.
Yeah, so the film proved to be a worldwide phenomenon, the first film. It was the second highest grossing film in the United States in 1986 and went on to become the second highest grossing film worldwide at the box office as well, behind, what do you think?
86. Romancing the Stone.
Top Gun.
I am.
Beat Romancing the Stone. And there are 2 versions of the film, the Australian version and an international version, which had much of the Australian slang replaced with more commonly understood terms and was slightly shorter. I don't know which one we saw.
Yeah.
I can't imagine it matters. So, we talked about this a little bit before. Have these films aged well?
No, they haven't.
Initially, I didn't think we'd have to discuss this because, like, the various misogynistic microaggressions were like, it was 86, I can look past these things, and it's kind of accurate to what the character would be like. And then Mick Dundee sexually harasses a trans person, and I was like, we need to talk about this.
Yeah. Yeah, because were you not aware of that scene?
No, not really.
Oh, yeah.
It didn't seem... I wasn't like, how is no one talking about this? But I wasn't... it made sense that it was in this film. But so do you want to relay what happens?
So basically, Mick's at a bar. He's having a chat to everyone. And, trans person comes up to Mick and is kind of hitting on him. And he obviously, hasn't picked up that it's... I guess it's more of like a drag queen almost than like a trans person. It's like... Well, I don't know.
Let's get into this.
And Mick's, having a great time chatting, and then his friend pulls him aside and was like, "Oi, that's a dude," and he was like, "Why?" He's like, "It's a fag." One of these like.
So already you're like, "Ooh."
and so Mick like goes over and grabs the genitals. And is like, right, okay, and then wanders off and
shames them out. They're like, it's a bloke or whatever, like yells, and everyone's laughing, and this poor person like walks away with tears, and they're like, it's played real like genuinely. They look really upset.
No, because it's later on. He's talking to another trans person. Well, this is just it's like a very dressed up.
It's a woman who could be a man if you didn't know better. The character's a woman. The
second time?
The second one, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no.
I think it was just supposed to be a woman, but she just had masculine, like the casting call.
Because I thought... I mean, I don't know who played them, but like, I thought it was like... It was just a man wearing makeup.
Right.
It was the very old queen.
The casting call would have been a woman with masculine features. Like that's how I would describe the second person.
Oh, well, it's interesting that we had different.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, no, because then he grabs the second person's crotch and goes, just checking. So to me, that was like it was a woman because she's kind of like.
Yeah. See, I saw that because he's not hateful. He grabs it and he's like, oh yeah, there's a penis there.
Sure.
And then the person's like, oh, wow, I'll have to come back here.
Because, of course, they...
Which I feel like, anyway.
Yeah. No, I mean, the Mick... You're right, Mick isn't hateful, he's just naive, but the film still kind of gives him a pass, and everyone who does know better just kind of laughs and goes with it, but it's like... That's something you pull him aside for and be like, don't do that. That's not appropriate.
And then because in the third film, we have because a lot of people mistake them for cowboys dressed up as like bushmen. Mm-hmm. And Mick and Jacko, his brother, go into a nightclub. They're like, oh, there's some cowboys going to a nightclub. Little do they realise it's obviously like a gay club. And then they like immediately walk back out.
Yeah, and then Jacko goes, oh, it must be one of those poofter bars. And
he's like, oh, I think the correct term is actually gay homosexual.
Which is interesting that the film was aware enough at that time to like put something vaguely politically correct in there, like in the realm of being
I think you're giving them. I don't know. You're not giving 2001 enough credit. Like I think the term poofter has kind of always been derogatory.
Yeah, of course.
I don't think at any time in history they were like, yeah, no, this is socially acceptable.
No, what I'm saying is that the fact that Mick goes, oh, the proper term is actually gay homosexual, is like. Shows that Mick has an understanding that you shouldn't be derogatory towards gay people.
But you know what's funny? A couple of days earlier in the film, a woman is hitting on Mick and she's like, oh, so you're gay? And he's like, oh yeah, I like to think I'm pretty happy.
Yeah.
And then like a couple of days later, he's like, "Oh yeah, they're called gays, homosexuals."
He says gay homosexual, which is a double positive, right? Because you don't need to say gay; you could just say homosexual. Which is it's this weird kind of break in the film's reality because it shows that he does know what gay means. Maybe he learned from that woman. I don't know.
Yeah, well, no, I think it's as well that like you're showing this. Because there's a few times like in the third film where Mick's like, "Oh yeah, I'm the expert on this." And yeah, things like being like they're called gay homosexuals, and it's like that's not the term.
Yeah,
like that's not how you say it. But so it's like it's funny, but it also shows that he's making the effort to learn these things, and especially since his experiences in the first film.
Yeah. Okay. Well, So yeah, pretty crass, pretty dated by today's standards.
Please let us know if we
Yeah,
used any incorrect terminology.
Richard and I strive to be like good with this stuff, so we're not going to be some of those people who get real mad if you try correct us. But our intentions are good.
Are pure.
Yeah. Cool. Did you? Have
we
anything?
want to expose the film for its wrongdoings, not expose our own.
Yeah. All right. So let's move from that conversation, which we gave its proper. We gave it time.
All right. Let's step off those eggshells and into.
Into our last segment of the show called Continue the Franchise, and this is a segment where Richard and I pitch a sequel or a way to continue the Crocodile Dundee legacy.
Now with more effort.
Yeah, we've decided we had a talk off pod about this. We're like, we need to start putting more effort into our CTFs. So from now on,
so the next half hour of the podcast is just going to be this.
But before we get to our ideas, the Crocodile Dundee brand has been carried on in one or two ways already, mainly in commercials, the more obscure of which would be a 1999 ad for Subaru, and of course the 2018 Super Bowl ad campaign for Australian tourism, which, if you've already forgotten about, that came out in January. This was a series of teaser trailers for a film called Dundee, the Son of a Legend Returns Home, which starred Danny McBride as Mick's American son, Brian Dundee, who returns to Australia in search of his now missing father with the help of Australian guide Wally Jr., played by Chris Hemsworth.
Wally being a character in the original films we haven't spoken about.
Yeah, the trailers featured various other actors, including Hugh Jackman as the Australian Prime Minister, Margot Robbie as Lil Donk. Donk was also a character in the series, which I didn't realise when I saw the Dundee trailers that she was a reference to something. I was just like, that's an odd character, odd name to give a character. There's also Russell Crowe as JP Steele, who would have been the villain, Ruby Rose as Chief Jackson, Liam Hemsworth as Wes Windsong, Jessica Malboy as Miss Thompson, Luke Bracey as the cricket legend, and Isla Fisher as Dr. Clark, who I didn't know was Australian, and I must have never seen interviews with Isla Fisher because
she's Australian.
Yeah, I cannot picture her with an Australian accent.
That's so weird. She's in. That's why I feel like she has an Australian accent in Arrested Development, but of course she doesn't.
No, she doesn't. She has an Australian accent in the trailer that she's in for Dundee, the Son of a Legend Returns Home.
I've definitely seen her in something. Or does she have one of Wedding Crashers? Maybe. I've definitely seen her in something with an American accent. With an Australian accent.
Yeah. So this must have been a weird thing for these A-list actors to do because they have very little screen time for what ultimately.
I don't know. They're all Australian actors. If you guys didn't pick up on that, but it's also just get Hugh Jackman in a suit in front of a green screen and get him to be like, "What do you mean, Mick's missing? Dundee's missing in the outback. He is the outback."
Yeah,
and it's 10 seconds out of his day.
Yeah,
and you're promoting Australia.
Yeah. The trailers culminated in a reveal during this year's Super Bowl that it was all an ad for Australian tourism, and Paul Hogan cameoed. There's a part where Chris Hemsworth goes, "You're the best Crocodile Dundee since Crocodile Dundee," and Danny McBride's like, "Really?" And then it cuts to Paul Hogan watching them across the bar, and he kind of scowls, and it's clearly they filmed him on a different day because he doesn't. That's it, and they don't interact any further.
I loved those ads though, man.
They were cool. They were funny. The one where he's like, "You Brian Dundee?" and he's like, "Yeah," and he's like, "Really?" "Yeah."
He's like, "Why do you keep saying really?"
Yeah, that's a really good little comedic performance that I quite like.
Yeah, no, they were great, man. Because the first one came out and it was just this teaser show. It was all these sweeping shots of the Australian outback, obviously, to promote the beautiful landscapes and stuff like that. And it's the son of a legend returns home, and then it's Danny McBride standing on a cliff face is like, "That's not a knife. This is a knife," and he does all these sweet nunchuck type knife moves, and then it's Dundee, the son of a legend, returns home, and he's like, "G'day, losers."
Yeah, it's pretty good. But do you know? Yeah. So the line that this movie, the first film, and ergo the whole franchise is famous for, is when they get mugged in New York, or someone tries to mug them in New York and they pull a switchblade on them, and Sue's like, he's got a knife, Mick, and he goes, that's not a knife. And then he pulls out this giant Australian hunting knife and he's like, that's a knife. And it's common, as you message me, it's commonly misquoted as being, that's not a knife, this is a knife. It's actually, that's not a knife, that's a knife. But in Dundee, the Son of a Legend Returns Home, Danny McBride says, that's not a knife, that's a knife. So he gets the line right, which I thought was a
well, because I guess it's only really misquoted because of the brilliant Simpsons joke where they're like, that's not a knife, this is a knife. That's not a knife, that's a spoon. All right, I see you've played Knifey Spoony before. Like, what are the rules of Knifey Spoony? Like, how do you win? Like, he's like, oh, okay, all right.
You would win by not realizing it's a spoon. So you only realize you're playing Knifey Spoony if you lose it or win it.
Right, yeah.
Sweet. So, Paul Hogan himself has repeatedly stated he doesn't want to make any more films, but Chris Hemsworth is apparently keen. Like, the Super Bowl ad was so popular with people, and so he was like, let's do it for real. And apparently him and Danny McBride were worried that people would be disappointed and angry if they found out it was just an ad. And I'd say that's kind of accurate. I was kind of disappointed.
Yeah, man. Yeah, fuck. Do you know what's funny? So all of the posters for it, because they released a bunch of teaser trailers before the full one where it's revealed, but they were all posted to Reddit and they all went to the top of our movies. And when the full trailer was released, I was like, oh, this isn't on our movies. So I was the one that posted it, and all the comments were like, what the fuck does this have to do with movies? What the fuck are you posting? This is just an ad. It's like every single other one got there, and it's like a character being like a famous film character being reprised, and I've seen so much fucking worse shit on our movies.
Yeah.
That everyone's just like, well, it got downvoted to hell, and it's like, fucking, you liked all the other shit to do with this fucking ad campaign.
Reddit,
as you can tell, I'm really bitter.
Is a tumultuous beast, though it did work in our favour this week. So hello to all our new listeners.
But also, the reveal in that ad is real funny as well when they're sitting, because it's like it's just a trailer for a new Dundee film. And then Chris Hemsworth and Danny McBride are like sitting at lunch, and the Sydney Opera House is behind them. And he's like, "Oh, we've had a great adventure. You know, we've got all these sweeping landscapes and some of the best beaches in the world." And he's like, "Wait a minute, this is a trailer for a movie, so this is a fucking tourism ad for Australia."
Yeah. So no, it's good stuff, and it's not a movie I wouldn't want to see. Though I would say I don't know if the trailers captured the spirit of the original Dundee movie. But I don't care. I'm not tied to it. It felt, maybe just because Danny McBride was front and center, it felt more like a Danny McBride film. So also the only other thing I could find that was of interest was years before the third film was announced, there was talk of a crossover between Crocodile Dundee and Beverly Hills Cop, which is a franchise we haven't actually covered before on this podcast.
So we can't say anything about it.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to go first or should I go first?
I'll go first.
All right. What is your continue the franchise?
So, if you cast your mind back to the end of Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles, they're back in Australia, and he's like, "Oh yeah, me, Crocodile Dundee," and he's like, "Oh, not anymore, Mick Dundee, PI," and he looks at the camera and he winks. He's like, "Oh, I'm only joking," and he wanders off. And the film ends immediately.
No, it ends with the crocodile catching the bouquet and then Mick and Jacko taking off their jackets to go wrestle the crocodile.
But I thought, what about a TV series of Mick Dundee, PI? So this would have been good for the 90s animated show in the same vein as The Mask, Ace Ventura, and Back to the Future.
Yeah.
But you couldn't really do it animated these days. I thought maybe you could do it like a BoJack Horseman-y kind of style, maybe. But I'd rather you could do like a live action kind of thing. And again, it would probably work better in the 90s. But it comes out today, whatever. So I'd like to see it have. We can recast Paul Hogan. Don't really mind. just this idea of like a guy from the Australian outback solving crimes in the big city. So you've got fish out of water, but he's also got this like keen sort of never give up attitude, and he's quite a good. He's observant, and and uses his outback skills to solve crimes and stuff. So I would want to have like a series long arc and like season long arcs as well. You'd have the occasional monster of the week type episode procedural thing, but so season 1 would be Mick chasing down some unknown crime boss or serial killer or something, and it'd have like a gang of misfits around him as well. So I'd want him to really grow as a character over the series, not have these random moments where you just need him to be a fucking idiot and like forget stuff that we know he knows.
Yeah.
But he still uses his outback know-how. But season 1 would end with something going wrong, which forces Mick back to Australia. Maybe he gets found, like, he was there illegally and he gets deported back to Australia, something like that, but he ends up back in Australia. The season would end with him trapped there, and then the big bad would be revealed back in the big city, and it would be like someone we know from the first season, something like that. So then the second season is like Mick trying to get back to the big city, but also we see this person we've come to love, how evil they truly are throughout the whole second season, and so on and so on.
I reckon you could still do that as an animated thing. And you could even do a crossover with Mike Tyson Mysteries, which is another animated show, since Mike Tyson was in the third film. Now, that's cool. I like it. It's a good direction to take it, especially after the third film.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so my sequel idea. This is a type of sequel that we haven't really talked about before on Film Franchise Fortnights, mainly because it didn't really exist when we started the podcast. It's a very new trend. But I'd like to follow in the footsteps of the upcoming Halloween movie and the upcoming Terminator 6 and make a sequel to the original film in a new continuity that ignores the other sequels.
Right, okay.
I wish there was a simple way to phrase this, because I'd love to do a podcast where we pitch what movies, you know what I mean? Like, what movie should get a sequel now that ignores its previous sequels, but that feels too long for the SoundCloud's limit on what you can call your podcasts. So, in my film, Mick has been living with Sue in New York for over 30 years since the end of the first film, and when we see him, he has become completely Americanized. The Mick Dundee we once knew is no more. Instead, he's a kind of chubby 78-year-old man, because that's how old he is now, with an American accent, and he stays inside watching TV and eating. However, things get a bit hairy for old Mick when the untimely death of his wife, Sue, after that, he discovers he no longer has any idea of how to take care of himself. So he decides to return to Australia to go walk about and rediscover himself and relearn all the ways of the outback he used to know a long time ago. The film would feature an elderly, blubbering Dundee slowly regaining his old strengths through fighting crocodiles and snakes and going on Aboriginal vision quests. And the film is called Hamburger Dundee.
I was with you until your last two words.
You don't like Hamburger Dundee?
No, it's fucking stupid. I like the idea of flipping the fish out of water thing so that it's about like a real Americanized guy coming to. I thought, like the obvious kind of way to do a sequel is have him like interact with millennials and stuff like that. Like still be like, oh, I don't know, bloody what a smartphone is. Oh, bloody, I have to be next to my phone if I want a phone call. Or what's a cell phone? And why are you eating laundry detergent?
That's if you're listening to this, question.
If you're listening to this like far in the future, that reference is already old.
Yeah.
Like. This isn't. We're not currently living in the Tide Pod era.
No, the great Tide Pod wars have long since passed.
Hamburger Dundee.
I've got some other titles.
You got some other titles. Good.
I haven't written them down, so I'll have to make them up on the spot. Well, remember them on the spot. The other one, I thought like Crocodile Dundee goes walkabout. Crocodile Dundee goes bush. Crocodile Dundee returns home. That kind of thing.
Crocodile Dundee Homecoming.
Yeah. That's it.
Crocodile Dundee Far From Home.
And now he's Spider-Man.
Yeah. Actually, Crocodile Dundee Walkabout isn't too bad.
There you go. So there we go. Those were a couple of good continue the franchises that we put effort into because we care about you, our listeners. Awesome. So that's it. That's our conversation on Crocodile Dundee. We're just hit an hour, so that's a good little time of your day. You know, you've probably got to work by now.
You've got 23 more of these.
Yeah. I thought you meant podcast episodes, and I was like, have we done like 100?
Yeah, actually, this is our 101st episode of the podcast.
Oh, look at that. How cute is that? That's awesome. So, thank you very much for listening. If you want to... Oh, wait. No, we need to continue. We need to do franchise... Well, we don't have franchise roulette. We have...
Yeah. We just have to announce what our next franchise is.
Yeah, so every second franchise we're doing now, what we're doing is if you donate as little as $1 to our Patreon, patreon.com/cultpopture, you can actually suggest and vote on what, like, every second franchise that we do. So we did this a couple of weeks back, and we asked people to suggest, and we got heaps of suggestions. We got, I think, 11 different suggestions from our patrons, but the winning suggestion with a whopping 5 likes is Toy Story. So next fortnight, we're doing the Toy Story trilogy.
Yay! So join us back here in exactly 2 weeks' time to talk about Toy Story with us. And you know what? Go watch them yourself.
Yeah, Toy Story is a good one to watch.
Everybody loves Toy Story. Toy Story is going to be one of those good ones to talk about because everyone's seen all of them.
Yeah, it'll be a good one to try make one that you can listen to for the first, like, if you've never listened to the show before.
Yeah. So we're not going to be referencing Beethoven.
No.
We're not going to be referencing Earbud.
We're
not going to be talking about 9/11. We're not going to be talking about the lost episode.
We could allude to the fact that we have more episodes, though. So that
AJ's not going to give any dumb title suggestions.
What's wrong with the Toy Story titles? They're fine.
No, but you're not going to give any dumb ones to alienate the audience.
I've never given a dumb one. If you liked this show, you can also like us on Facebook. Go find Cult Popture. Subscribe to us on YouTube, on SoundCloud, on iTunes. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Or email us at cultpopturemedia@gmail.com. All these places are places that you can find us and support us, as well as our Patreon if you've been listening for a while and want to give something back. I'm just looking at our Patreon. It says, we're having trouble with your payment method. So
yeah,
maybe not then.
No, that's for us paying other creators.
Oh, okay. Which you do, but I don't. Sweet. Okay, so thank you very much for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time on Film Franchise Fortnights or the Cult Popture podcast, because every second week around here we do something that isn't pertaining to a franchise.
Yeah, what's it going to be next week, AJ?
Don't know yet. Still trying to frantically think of something. But hey, if you've got an idea, let me know. If we like suggestions for off-week podcasts, we'll do them as well.
Yeah.
All right.
So bloody good on you, and
hooroo.
Have a good 23 remaining hours of your day.
Hooroo! That's the Australian for goodbye. All right, goodbye, everybody.
Bye.